Let's get into our very first conversation. Now, in South Africa, adoption is regulated by the Children's Act 38 of 2005 and is overseen by the Adoption Services and the Children's Court. Key legal principles require the adoptions be in the best interests of the child, which includes providing a permanent, stable family environment. Eligible individuals or couples must be at least 18 years of age, South African citizens or permanent residents, and financially and emotionally stable. The process involves getting consent from the biological parents, with some exceptions, and if the child is 10 or older, their consent will also be considered as well. Now, joining us to further gauge the context of adoption is the Director of Impilo Child Protection and Adoption Services. This is Sue Krawitz. Thank you so much for joining us, Sue. Welcome to African Diaries.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be with you.
So just for those who aren't familiar with the context of South Africa's adoption system, just walk us through the context. An overview would be lovely.
Yes, well, as you said, adoptions are guided by the Children's Act, and that gives us very clear guidelines, not guidelines, laws, in fact, on how to conduct adoptions. We are also regulated further by having to be accredited specifically for adoptions by the Department of Social Development. So within that context, there are a lot of controls.
So let's look at a context, and I forgive me for getting a little grim. Just prior to this discussion spoke about human traffickers and how they do oppose as legitimate adoption agencies or look for vulnerabilities in the adoption systems. Have we seen such cases? And perhaps let's extend the conversation to that end to navigate that terrain.
Well, I think what's really important for everybody to know who's either considering adoption or is a mother and father who are thinking of placing their child in adoption, that they must deal with an accredited adoption organization or private practitioner. Anything other than that is not legal. The Department of Social Development falls within that ambit as well, but nobody should deal with anybody who makes promises or offers things, or if there is an exchange of money other than for professional fees. That's really important. The vulnerability of parents who are pregnant and may not know what to do, and also parents looking to adopt or people looking to adopt, is really can put people in a very, very difficult situation. So it's important to check the credentials of who you're dealing with, and also to know that everything has to go through the court. Otherwise, it's not legal.
So let's look at some of these certifications that potential parents should be looking out for. What are these verifying documents that one ought to be scouting when engaging with an adoption agency?
So it's called accreditation, and one should always check for that. It is a letter or a certificate that is given by the various departments in the provinces, and then it also goes through the National Department of Social Development. And it must be, you've also got to look at the dates of that accreditation, because it only stands for certain periods of time. So it's very important that these things are checked out. And it's just a matter of asking for those letters or certificates in some instances. It's not difficult to obtain. And if you cannot get that, then you must know that it's not legitimate.
Now, Sue, you have been in the space of adoption for quite some time. I'm only now learning that there are different kinds of adoptions. Give us the context to that, and what do you specifically specialize in?
Okay, so I'm fortunate in that I've worked in all the different kinds of adoptions over the years, but there are different kinds. So first of all, there are related and non-related adoptions. So let's say a mother gets remarried and her new husband wants to adopt the child. Perhaps the husband is the father is no longer involved, or perhaps he's deceased, etc. So those are related, and usually both parties would know each other. Then we have what is called non-disclosed, where the parties don't know each other. So, for instance, a mother would come and say, I've made a decision on adoption, and she would have to receive intensive counseling on what options are available to her. And she can then choose to give up her child to an unknown person. And that's where the accredited organizations are so important, in that the people who are adopting must be screened, thoroughly screened, and ready and prepared with all their documentation to accept this child into their family. And bearing in mind that the issue of disclosure can also be they're different kinds. So let's say a mom says, I would like to meet this family, or I'd like to have contact after the birth of the child. There are different kinds of agreements that the court will enter into as part of the adoption. So it goes from knowing the person who's adopting to having absolutely no information or further knowledge about where the child is going to. And the mother and father, when they're around, can have a choice of how they choose to deal with it. And this would be based on the counseling and what their needs are.
So just before we get onto a different playing field conversationally, I want us to touch on the importance of legitimizing the adoption. So I was thinking of the context of a mom who remarries, and let's say the dad is no longer in the picture, it could be vice versa, and how we would naturally assume that stepfather is the father and takes accountability for the child. But the reality is that there's an entire legal framework that speaks to the context of the father and the child in so many aspects. Perhaps ours is to give an overview of that so that there's an understanding and a clarity around why we need to legalize adoption.
Okay, so that's actually very important. A step parent who steps into the role of a child of the partner has no legal standing over that child. So it works both ways, rights and responsibilities. So perhaps the new husband would take on all the responsibilities of this child, but he has no legal standing. He can even change the name of the child. That can even be done, but he still does not appear on the birth certificate. What's very important is that once an adoption is done, the birth certificate is changed from the original parents to the new. So in a stepmom, she would stay on. The stepfather, he would come onto the birth certificate and then be the legitimate father of that child. It naturalizes and as if born to you is actually what the Act says. So it takes away the rights of the original parents and gives those to new parents, if that makes it clearer.
Absolutely does. If you've just joined us, welcome to it. We're currently in conversation with the current director, who is joining us to speak to the realities of adoption in South Africa, the director of Impilo Child Protection and Adoption Services. This is Sue Krawitz, who joins us. If you want to send through your questions, do find us on WhatsApp +27 634069126. Sue, I want to talk about the process of adoption, right? Because
Yes.
children can come from different contexts and they're not always newly born babies. Sometimes they're aged 2, 4, having experienced quite a bit in their lives. One context that I want us to hone into is the context of GBV. If there was a prevalent exposure of GBV to this child, there's an obvious need for some kind of psychological training and readiness for the parents that are coming into the context. How do we mitigate that?
Because I actually want to start first with the parents that are taking on the child. We call them prospective adoptive parents. As part of the screening for any adoption, the process must include a preparation program where you would discuss with the people adopting, and we usually do it in a group setting so that there's learning from each other. And we discuss things like, when do you tell the child? How do you tell the child? What do you tell the child? What if the child is conceived as a result of rape? How do you express that? And at what point is it appropriate to explain? How do you tell other people? And then also, as part of those educational preparational groups, we bring in an adoptee, we bring in an adoptive parent, we bring in people who have been through the process from different angles to talk to the group and to give them an opportunity to learn. And it's a preparation for when it does happen. And it is so extremely important because it helps them to get themselves psychologically and not physically. You know, when you're pregnant, it's a physical and psychological process. When there is no pregnancy, it has to be a psychological process of preparing yourself for that adoption. So it's an intensive group in which we would prepare our parents. Now, the other part of your question was about the biological parents. Is that correct? Did you ask me how we prepare them?
More so the child, and I suppose
The
it
child,
would be
that's right.
fitting
Sorry.
to speak to the
Yes.
biological parents as well. But please, let's proceed.
Okay, so the child, it all depends on age. Now, as you mentioned, newborn babies are not often available for adoption because of the processes that are involved. So, for instance, after a child is born, it has to have a birth certificate, and that can take sometimes very quickly, other times it takes time. We also have abandoned babies that become available, and these children have to be made available for adoption, and that's really important. The Act requires that certain criteria are met. So a 5-month child who becomes available for adoption is prepared very differently to a 3-year-old. And we take these children through a process of introducing them to the parents, preparing them with photos to say, this is going to be your mom and dad, and talking to the child about it before you bring the parents physically into the picture. If it's an older child, let's say the child is 9 or 10, this is a very involved process where one has to psychologically prepare the child. I have to say that older children are not often adopted, and that is a pity. But at the same time, the older the child becomes, the more complex the situation and the more baggage, so to speak, that child has. Now, you mentioned GBV and abuse. Some of these children are victims of difficult situations. And one would have to ensure that these have been dealt with. Children require a medical assessment and also psychological assessments or educational, depending on their age. So when a parent takes on a child, they know what to expect. That's a really important point. You don't just throw people into the deep end. You provide them with as much information and support throughout the process. And sometimes years after, you're still in contact with parents dealing with these issues. With regard to the biological parents, we also have to prepare them for the process of making this decision. Because remember, they're losing their rights. And we would have to ensure that they are psychologically supported through that difficult time.
Sue, I think as a way to round up our conversation, let's touch base on some of the work that Impilo Child Protection and Adoption Services has done.
Yes, so we've been around for 23 years. I personally have been around a bit longer doing adoptions. And we cover all sorts of adoptions: family, related, non-related, national and intercountry adoptions. So our organization is also a child protection organization. So we deal with children coming out of all sorts of situations. And our objective really is to ensure that children grow up in families. Now, the first choice is obviously the biological family, the family of origin. And if that's possible, and, if we are able to return a child to a mother and father sometimes, that's very important. Also, there's foster care. So let's say an aunt wants to adopt, we would consider that too. And adoption is then one of the options that are available for these children. Unfortunately, some children end up staying longer in children's homes, or CYCCs as we call them, because of difficult circumstances. Perhaps they aren't well, perhaps there are medical issues, perhaps there are difficulties with the child psychologically. As wonderful as our children's homes may be, children belong in families with a mom and dad, or a mom or a dad, whichever combination, so that they feel that they belong and become part of that family. So that's the work that we do. We also do a lot of outreach in terms of GBV, teen pregnancy, and bullying, which has become a huge social problem in our country at the moment.
So for those who are looking to perhaps access your service or give of themselves to your service, how do they find you?
Our website is www.impilo.org.za. You'll also find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Sue, this has been fruitful. Thank you so much for the wisdom and just the factual base when it comes to adoption.
With pleasure. Thank you.
The voice there of Sue Krawitz joining us this evening, the Director of Impilo Child Protection and Adoption Services. It is a minute after 11 p.m. Central African time. If you have just joined us, thank you so much for choosing us over the rest. Ponder on the subject matter of adoption, the necessity for neutralizing the context of you in a child's life. I think just drawing back to the wise or lies statement that states human traffickers can and do pose as legitimate adoption agencies or use vulnerabilities within the adoption systems to facilitate child trafficking. Just to give you the 411 on that, this is indeed truth. And so this practice is known as a form of modern slavery and exploitation, and sometimes referred to as baby selling or child laundering. If you're not familiar, you're saying, Sheila, I have never heard of this, and I'm not too sure of this context. I want you to go read up on it. I think sometimes a short stint of the information is a good way to conscientize the mind. However, familiarize yourself with this context and reality. So should you come across an adoption agency that says, hey, listen, no paperwork, you take the child, just give us some money, and it's done. It's not a real thing. It really isn't a real thing. Let's get some music.
Conversations that touch the heart and inspire change. Here on African Diaries, only on Channel Africa. Join us on www.channelafrica.co.za.